clay day rolling through your feet. In the car with the convo, keeping it true. Talking life, talking dreams, bringing insight to you. From the front seat visions to the backseat laughs, we ride through the culture, no brakes, all gas. The car conversations, keep your mind racing. Big heart talk with a bold foundation. Queen, they got the crown. Clay Day got the drive. Together they spark what keeps your soul alive. So buckle up, let's cruise the lane where the vibes are deep and the talk ain't plain. It's the show that you needed today. With Queen Day and Clay D, press play.
On into this. All right. So we get right into it here. So my first question is, let's start with the heart of it. When you first encountered this story for the right track, encountered these stories from survivors, what moment made you realize this wasn't just a film project, but a moment that needed to happen?
Well, as a director, I I mean, I realized that these stories that I was hearing were so, I think, undertold. And I realized that the general population really needed to understand what people who are trapped in sexual exploitation or commercial sex work or sex trafficking. Um, I felt like the general population really needed to understand what these people have gone through or are going through. And that to me really inspired me to keep going and make sure that this movie was made and seen by a wide population.
That's definitely very touching to hear. And this film does do a deep dive that shines a light on one of our more urgent social justice issues, as this film is being screened over at DC Docs. Now, now from what I gather, it was mentioned that this is all happening in plain sight across North America. What does that look like in everyday communities? How are people missing the signs, and what should we be looking for?
Well, I can talk a little bit about, here in DC, where our organization's based. I mean, this is happening all across, communities all throughout the US, but, it's often happening to our marginalized communities, right? Like when we're talking about, communities like, overwhelmingly young kids of color, overwhelmingly Black and Brown youth, LGBTQ youth, kids from foster care, those who have experienced childhood trauma, what we call adverse childhood experiences, kids who come out of the child welfare system, those who've been system involved in other ways. We have a lot of statistics on our website. Our organization Rights for Girls compiles a lot of data on this. But Audra, serves survivors who are adult victims, and what we know is often these child trafficking survivors grow up to become the adults in the commercial sex trade, because they still have a lot of these vulnerabilities and barriers to being able to exit the industry. So even if they no longer have a third party exploiter like a trafficker or a pimp, they're still very vulnerable and have a lot of the challenges that keep them from being able to exit the industry. And so it's often our most marginalized people in our communities that are most at risk. And so that's why we say it's like it's happening in plain view, but oftentimes people dismiss it and often write it off as prostitution and people are just choosing to do it. It's a victimless crime and don't really understand the extreme violence at the heart of this industry that's fueled by oftentimes affluent men's sexual entitlement. And that's what the heart of this film is, showing that, the extreme harm that is being perpetrated against these oftentimes women and girls.
If you could do a little deeper dive, the film centers on the survivor model. Now, for our listeners who may not be familiar, can you just a little bit more break down this approach and how it fundamentally shifts the conversation from criminalizing victims to holding the real perpetrators accountable, as you just described, wealthy, entitled men?
Yes. So, I mean, my pimp wouldn't have sold me if people wouldn't have bought me. So it's that simple, right? Like if you go after the demand and you provide exit services and support to people that are affected or impacted by the sex trade, you would decrease trafficking, right? Like there's not enough willing participants right now for the sex trade. So for me, it makes sense. I do a lot of like demand reduction classes too in my area in New England, and just talking to sex buyers about the realities and the harm is, you get a couple people to start shifting their thinking. They're like, oh my God, this isn't okay. Like, look at all the damage I've done. I had one guy break down and cry and say he lost his job, his wife's leaving him, all these consequences. They don't think that there's consequences, and there's consequences for every decision that we make, whether that's good or bad. But, you got to really look at it all the way.
The film does
And
feature.
see all the people that you're hurting, when you're, yeah. Oh.
Yeah, the film does also feature incredible courage from survivors rebuilding their lives. What did you learn about these specific challenges women face in this industry and excuse me, in this journey? And what kind of support systems actually make a difference?
I believe peer support models work, people with lived experience, lifting others up, and having our strong allies there as well. I need my clinical people. I need people with social worker backgrounds. There's a lot of trauma that we have to fix and heal, but just being able, it's the stigma that goes along with it. I was always known as like the dirty prostitute or whatever else. And it's like, we need to shift the language. I wasn't a prostitute. I was prostituted, or I was exploited. And it's just important to just not shame those that have been in it. It's not for us to carry the shame. It's for the buyers to carry the shame. It's for the traffickers, So shifting that perspective.
And law enforcement and policymakers are a part of this conversation. What needs to change systemically, and how can communities hold their elected officials accountable for progress on the public policy front?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to your question on the survivor model. I mean, I think all across the country, survivors and advocates have been advancing, survivor-centered policies to really hold accountable exploiters, including sex buyers, because, a lot of policies have focused on traffickers, but as Audra said, traffickers are only responding to the commercial demand for, buying commercial sex. And if there was no demand, there would be no need to traffic vulnerable people. And so all across the country, we've seen this very well-funded, well-coordinated effort to decriminalize sex work. And what people don't understand is these efforts don't just seek to decriminalize sex workers or, prostituted people. They also seek to repeal laws against pimping, sex buying, and brothels, which expand the industry and drive up trafficking and require more vulnerable people to be trafficked to meet the increase in demand that would result from decriminalizing sex buying, right? As Audra said, we already have a sex trafficking problem because there aren't as many willing participants to meet the demand that already exists. So if you were to greenlight sex buying, more men enter the market as new clients. Who would be required to meet that demand? We already know it would be people from marginalized communities. A couple of years ago in DC, for example, the council was looking to decriminalize the sex trade here in DC. A bunch of people showed out. 200 people came and testified. It was a 14-hour hearing, and they defeated the bill. But there's been bills all over the country seeking to do this, to repeal pimping, sex buying, and brothels. Vermont, Louisiana, New York, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Oregon, all over the country. And so we are holding lawmakers accountable and letting them know that, this is not harmless behavior, that, marginalized people deserve better than making it easier to sell themselves, that we actually demand real services and support, and buyer accountability matters. Rights for Girls just put out a report called Buyers Unmasked, exposing the men who buy sex and solutions to end exploitation, that actually quotes buyers in their own words so people can see how they think and talk about the people that they purchase for sex, and offers these types of solutions that Audra talked about and that they're doing in their community, to hold buyers accountable and actually promote survivor-centered solutions in ways that don't promote very carceral impacts, but actually keep the community safe and promote survivor services and funding.
This work takes an incredible emotional strain. And how do you and the survivors you've worked with maintain hope and keep pushing forward when the system feels so overwhelming?
When you get the small wins, I don't know. It's like you just gotta champion every little win. Like I just heard, yesterday New Hampshire passed a bill, and just being able to talk to people and maybe shift somebody's thinking, I think is really important for me. It makes me keep going. Some days is really hard, especially I do a lot of direct service too. We, see a lot of participants in and out and struggling. But when you see like laws start to change and people buy into this idea of what, our movement, that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, measuring success differently, elevating those survivor voices and letting people know that, success is possible. And by investing in survivors and, people have the capacity to do amazing things.
Great message. And how can individuals or even viewers who watch it at DC Docs, what can they do to support this project and what you're doing beyond the screening?
I think, supporting survivor-led organizations, donating to those organizations in your communities, finding ways to get involved, calling your representatives, making sure that they understand that you support these types of policies, buyer accountability in your communities, and, services for these survivors, that, these types of programs and, organizations matter to you. Like, for example, California is just struggling to make the purchase of minors, of children under the age of 18, a felony. Trafficking kids under the age of 18 is a felony for traffickers, but it's not a felony for purchasing kids under the age of 18. Like, why is that, right? And when you look at the demographics of who buyers tend to be versus, the demographics of who traffickers tend to be, it becomes really clear of who our lawmakers are, affording more legal protection. And so I think, just getting more involved in understanding some of these issues and, reaching out to your legislators and letting them know that, our kids aren't for sale, and that we care about, women and marginalized people in our communities.
Well, thank you, Yasmin. Thank you, Audra, and thank you, Shareen. And thank you, Justin and Sara, for coordinating. This is Clay's counsel here. And can't wait to support what you all are doing. It's great work. Let's just keep on going. Let's just keep celebrating small wins, keep chipping away, and stay empowered.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
One.
Thank you, Clay. Thanks all.
Justin.
Bye.